Wait for it. Wait for it, and we're live. Hey, all you crazy sci-fi and fantasy fans. It's time for your daily dose of shenanigans over here at the Blasters and Blades podcast. Just a couple of nerdy veterans, a stabby chaos coordinator, and one chief shenanigator geeking out over our science fiction passions and fantastical fantasies. A place where magic is king, the sky is the limit, and space is the place. We are the podcast that puts the fun in dysfunction. So without further ado, we're going to let our guest, Mr. Gregory Little, introduce himself to our listeners and viewers at home.
Hi, everyone. I'm Gregory D. Little. I'm the author of the Unwilling Souls, Mutagen Deception, and Belle Begrudgingly Solves It series. And I'm just going to come right out and say it. I really enjoy being a writer because I really enjoy tricking people. One of the greatest joys in my life is laughing maniacally whenever I sense that a reader has reached that part of one of my books. Doesn't matter if it's fantasy, sci-fi, or horror. They all have that part, but I promise you'll know it when you get to it. Or will you?
I don't know. Will they? Will they, Gregory?
Sometimes I do the, you think you've hit the twist and then the real one hits.
Do you do the maniacal laugh or do you do like the Diet Coca Viva laugh?
No, it's pretty maniacal.
Like, do you have the mustache to twirl when you do it, even if it's not yours? Do you like attach one just for the moment?
That's a good idea. I've never done that, but I should. That would be a lot of fun.
Yeah, you got all the good villains have the mustache moment, right? Like
yeah. I need to get a fake mustache and just to twirl.
Yeah, I'm not sure what qualifies as a good villain mustache, though. Does it have to be the handlebar that you can twirl, or will any mustache do that you can just kind of caress? I don't know.
Yeah, I think as long as it's long enough to grab an end and give it a good twist, it would suffice.
So if you've got opinions on mustaches and mustachios, dear listener, weigh in the comments. We want to know what makes a good villain mustache for you. That would be pretty funny if we could figure out a way to make that a panel just for the fun of it. I'm just not sure how we make that an hour episode.
Yeah, it would be. Everyone brings their best villain mustache, and you have a twirling and maniacal laughing contest.
That could be fun.
Yeah.
If I ever make it to another convention, I'll have to see if I can like film authors in the wild and have those moments.
Yes, that would be a lot of fun. I think authors would enjoy that.
In the field moments. All right. So before we get started, we do have to do the religion questions. Are you ready for this, sir?
I am ready.
All right. Star Wars, Star Trek, or Firefly?
You see, different times in my life would be different answers. As a kid, definitely Star Wars all the way. I still enjoy Star Wars quite a bit. Once I got more into my teenage years and early adulthood, Star Trek, I would say, took over for me. In particular, Star Trek Deep Space Nine. But as much as I look at the world now, and it's difficult to see a utopia forming of post scarcity, everyone acting their best selves all the time. If you can pry open my cold, cynical heart, I still do carry a deep love for Star Trek.
Deep Space Nine was an oddity in the 90s, in the early aughts, whenever it was at its heyday, because it was one of the few like positive examples of fatherhood that I'd seen on TV. Like, we were all familiar with like the Homer Simpson or the Al Bundy Married with Children, where the dads are basically supposed to be like bumbling king of queens or whatever. Like, all the dads are basically bumbling morons who would be dead without their wives, whereas this one, he's a single dad because he's a widow. And oh, by the way, he's actually good at his job and a good father. And I thought the world needed more of those good examples.
Yeah, I love me some Homer Simpson. Don't get me wrong, especially the early years of The Simpsons. But Benjamin Sisko on Deep Space Nine was a terrific character, terrifically written character, a great role model character. And I think I 100% agree. We need more characters written like he was written, where the single dad who is still has tons of responsibility at his job is managing to do his best at doing it all. And I think it's a stellar example of character writing right there.
Yeah, and we did the Badass Moms of Sci-Fi for Mother's Day, and we're going to do the equivalent for Father's Day this year, because I do think it'd be interesting, like as a discussion point in general. But that's what made it stand out at the time, is where you actually saw like an actual strong dad. So I really liked that about Deep Space Nine. I liked that it showed the grittier side of the Star Trek universe. Because the original series and the Next Generation were so utopian. I'm like, yeah, you just clearly you've never met people,
Right.
Because in order for me to believe that, I would have to think people are a lot better than generically they are intrinsically. So, but yeah, I really thought Deep Space Nine was a good one. Did you like the Enterprise series where the guy that played Quantum Leap was the captain and he had the dog Porthos? I don't remember the captain. Archer, maybe.
Archer, yeah.
Yeah, but Porthos, I remember the dog that ate cheese and
Yeah.
always wanted.
Enterprise was interesting. I appreciated that they were willing to experiment later on in the show's run. They kind of got into more serialized storytelling for a season. I think that was in part was experimentation, and part was trying to juice the ratings somewhat because it wasn't getting the ratings I think that the parent company wanted. But it was never my favorite of the series, but I did enjoy aspects of it, and I appreciated when they were willing to kind of. I always like it when, even if it doesn't entirely work, someone's willing to take a big creative swing at something and go kind of break outside the usual, the expected, and try something that's a little bit more risky, a little bit more daring. And even when those don't always work out, I always respect the effort.
Yeah, but I wouldn't necessarily call it was risky or daring in that all it did was look backwards into the timeline. So nothing was quite as nice. Everything was, they were still figuring stuff out. And so they took the sleek lines and they made it a little boxier, and the technology wasn't quite as good. So from a universe building, I thought they did a great job with the devolution of tech, de-evolution. And I thought that actually worked to build the lore more. I understand why people don't like it or didn't like it, because it didn't fit the serialized, utopian mode they're used to. If you only want Trek to be that one thing, but if you want it to be like this rich, diverse, lived-in universe, I thought it was great.
Yeah, I'm someone who I will get bored with any kind of franchise, I guess we'll say, that just keeps doing the same thing over and over again. I want them to experiment. I want them to treat the sort of world as a kind of living, breathing thing that is changing, that is evolving. And Star Trek in particular, given how much it was always intended to kind of reflect, real world events through a science fiction lens and explore those ideas in ways that maybe weren't quite as direct and therefore could get past people's defenses. I think by that very nature, Star Trek and things like it need to be willing to adapt to the times, to explore the changing face of the world through a science fiction lens. So I always appreciate when anything like that is not going to confine itself to just the same formula over and over again ad infinitum.
All right. Absolutely. I really dug it. So, I mean, like, I'm also the guy that likes Stargate Universe when no one else did. So I get like that I'm a weirdo. And I like the reboot of Battlestar Galactica when I'm told by the purists that it doesn't count. So,
I love Battlestar Galactica reboot.
I mean, I like the original, the parts that I've seen. My problem is I ended up buying the box set and it didn't like break it up by episode so I could pace myself watching it. It just gave me like 8 DVDs that were all 2 hours long. And I'm just like, okay, pause somewhere, I guess.
Oh, that's weird.
Or it was I don't know how long each video was. 2 hours probably was more than that. But like, it was just CDs that were back to back from episode 1 onward with no breaks per episode.
That would be horrible. Yeah.
And I
wouldn't like that at all.
Yeah. When you're trying to pace yourself, because who's got like 100 billion hours to sit and watch something straight through? And if you don't do it that way, like finding out where you were gets really confusing.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna go back and eventually find a better version of it and buy it because I liked both versions. Now, did you watch New Caprica?
I did. Yes. My wife and I actually both watched it. I even got her to watch it, and she's not usually she wasn't a fan of Battlestar itself. It was a little too sci-fi for her, but Caprica was a little bit more sort of near future sci-fi enough that she got into that as well.
Yeah, I really liked it, and like the whole mob families kind of thing, and the exploration of like the culture that was different enough.
Yeah, I thought it was great. I was disappointed that they canceled it after the first season.
Yeah, me too. I don't know. A lot of the shows I like end up getting canceled, so I kind of expect that of this. I'm almost afraid to like a show because that means it's not going to get very long.
I think we are kindred spirits.
Yeah, and then of course, if it goes to Fox Entertainment, it's just doomed.
Yes, well,
because Fox Entertainment is where good shows go to die.
Yeah, I guess that's true when you think about it.
I still haven't forgiven them aside from Firefly, they canceled Terra Nova, which was amazing. Did you ever watch that one?
I never saw. I remember that it was a show. I don't think I ever saw it.
Yeah, they ended the season 1 on a cliffhanger, like that was going to lead into like the discoveries of whatever future episodes. But of course, it gets canceled, so we don't know what any of that means. So you get the equivalent of like a Lost ending.
Oh, yeah.
It just sucks and proved nothing and did nothing. And in theory, by their own science, it shouldn't have been possible. So how it happened, we don't know. Because like the premise of the show is Earth is dying because pollution and stuff. So if you win the lottery ticket, you get to walk through this portal and end up in alternate version of Earth, because once you go back in time, you've changed the timeline, right? So it basically creates a parallel dimension, which means that at this point, like going back and forth becomes, if I remember correctly, only one way. Although they can communicate because they've deviated the timeline. But so in order for that to happen, if going back once deviates the timeline enough that you're in a parallel dimension, then they end it with, oh, by the way, we found this human boat way out there in the desert. Like, well, how did that get there then? And then they just end it. Like, you jerks.
They're desperately trying to like use the cliffhanger as leverage to get the show going, and the people making the calls are just like, yeah, we don't care.
Because they don't care about their viewers. They don't care about the people there's no implied promise of a satisfactory ending to a story. And right. If you didn't know that, just watch the ending on Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
I'm sorry if that's too soon, dear listener. We apologize for nothing. All right. So because we are polytheistic here at the Blasters and Blades podcast, Game of Thrones, The Wheel of Time, or Chronicles of Narnia?
I love Game of Thrones, the books, but my heart belongs to Wheel of Time. I read that series at the perfect age. I found that series at the perfect age to enjoy it, and I just really enjoyed Robert Jordan's ability to build an incredibly intricate world, to lay the foreshadowing groundwork in the first book for stuff that wouldn't pay off until the final book, which was tragically finished after his passing. But I just the series is not perfect. It definitely lags in parts, and could stand some cutting, especially toward the sort of, we'll call it the late middle section. But warts and all, I do love that series still to this day. So.
Okay. One of the crying shames of adulthood is that we stop asking each other the important questions in life. And thanks to the generosity of our sponsors, we are bringing that back. So I get to ask you, Gregory, what is your favorite dinosaur and why?
I have a boring answer for that, but hopefully for an interesting reason. The T-Rex is just you can't beat it. It's the classic. But the reason I think it's so cool is from a book I read recently. Discussing new advances in studying dinosaur behavior through their fossilized and in some case mummified remains, and they now are thinking that the T-Rex was actually quite intelligent, maybe as intelligent as a chimpanzee, and even maybe hunted in packs. And so the idea of this 20-ton, 2-story tall carnivore that could stare you down with the intelligence of a chimp, and while its pack mates came up at you from behind, that's a terrifying thought that just rockets it back up into the top of the awesome category for me.
So you like the giant murder chickens that think?
I mean, what's not to like, right?
So what do you think of the feather hypothesis, that they would have been feathered?
I think it's probably, accurate. And I'm not one who thinks that makes them less scary. If anything, it might make them more terrifying if they're like brightly colored giant murder chickens coming at you.
Have you seen the reboot or not the reboot, where they redid the scene with the velociraptors in Jurassic Park, where the two kids on the original movie are hiding in the kitchen? and the
Yeah.
velociraptors. Like they did that scene where they added the bird-like effect and the feathers to it, and it
Yeah.
actually got a little more scary. Not gonna
It's
lie.
the juxtaposition, right? Because it's this thing that you don't typically associate as being scary, but now it's large and clawed and terrifying and hunting you. And I think the juxtaposition actually makes it worse. Plus, if you've ever seen like a moa bird or any of the modern birds that you can look at and you're like, oh yeah, that's definitely a dinosaur. Those things are scary.
Yeah. Did you watch the Jurassic Park movies? Were you into that when you were younger?
Yeah, I definitely caught the Jurassic Park movies. In fact, actually reading Jurassic, I have a vivid memory of reading Jurassic Park, the original book, on the school bus going to middle school. So now I'm dating myself. But and I remember getting to the end, the part where the raptors are trying to chew their way through the protective bars because the power is off and get at the characters, and it was so gripped by that scene that I had to kind of tear myself away from it to get off the bus to go to school because the bus had arrived at school and I was sitting there in the seat just reading it white knuckled. So I have this very vivid memory of that.
The funny one is when we see the reboots where they talk about where they do some of the reskinning with the bird-like effect, it gives you that old question they used to ask people as like party icebreakers. Would you rather fight 100 chicken-sized horses or one T-Rex or one giant-sized chicken? And now that I'm picturing that giant chicken as the T-Rex or the Velociraptor, that question gets a lot different.
Yeah, it definitely does.
Because at the time you're like, oh, chickens aren't scary. I'm gonna take the chicken.
Right. Yeah.
And then you get
Until it's
more dinner out of it, right? But now it's
right.
like,
Yeah.
oh, yeah, you might be dinner.
Until it can peck you once and you're dead.
Yeah. Okay. So we are civilized human beings now here at the Blasters and Blades podcast. We are no longer knuckle dragging troglodytes. And I get to ask you, sir, coffee or tea, and how do you take it?
Iced tea, unsweet, as much of it as I can drink.
And you are the son of the South.
I've got a big glass of it right now.
You are a son of the South. Have they not kicked you out for the heresy known as unsweet tea?
Yeah, I know. I'm betraying my Southern roots, but I also have a lot of diabetes in the family, so I need to think about my health. And
yeah, I get you.
I've trained myself to like the unsweet stuff, and now actually sweet tea is just too cloying. If I order it in a restaurant and it comes sweet instead of unsweet, I'll take a sip and be like, blah, I can't, I can't drink this.
See, I'm that way if I drink the unsweet tea, but I don't drink a lot of it because calories are a thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel you on the health. You gotta limit the stuff you like, unfortunately. Man, I feel like I wasted my 20s where I could have enjoyed all the cool things just because they were good and tasted good. And now I'm like, man, I wasted it on the crap food just because I didn't care. And now I'm like, no, go drink another sweet tea.
I definitely had a period where I needed to retrain myself to liking more healthy foods because when I was young, I could eat whatever I want and not gain a pound. And so you develop some really bad habits when you can do that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. So obviously, like, we're here because it's a solo interview. So we're going to be talking about the book that the episode is named after. But before we do that, nobody starts off one day and says, I've never read a book in my life, but I'm just going to write one. At least I don't think anybody does. So how did you, before you started writing, you clearly liked all the cool things. So how did that like love of all things speculative fiction develop for you?
Well, I would say I'd have to credit my mom. She got me. It's funny. I remember watching the old Rankin Bass animated version of The Hobbit, right? That old animated adaptation, which I still have very fond memories of. And at the end of that, Gandalf makes an offhanded statement about the ring that that the story of the ring is not over, but it's only beginning. And I remember asking my mom, what did he mean by that? And she's like, well, I'm so glad you asked, because she has her old copies of Lord of the Rings, and I was too young to read them myself at that point, but I was old enough to understand them with her reading them to me and explaining the tougher parts to me. So that was a very formative experience for me. As I got older, I got into the Star Wars expanded universe books back before it got acquired by Disney, and those got relegated to the sort of Legends track of things. The idea of books that would continue the Star Wars stories was amazing to me. And at a certain point, a friend of mine and I decided, hey, we could write our own Star Wars book. And so we started doing it. In between classes. We would pass around a spiral, three subject notebook and handwrite chapters, and I would write a chapter, and then he would write a chapter. And as you can imagine, it pretty quickly devolved into a contest of how much of a sticky situation could you put the characters in, and then force the other guy to find a way to get them out. So I wouldn't call it great writing by any stretch of the imagination, but we had a lot of fun with it.
Did you keep any of those? Are they around for future readers?
Oh, I do have those, yes. I'm not saying anyone will ever get to see them, but they're around for my amusement.
Does he have any of them, the friend, or she? I don't know.
Does he have it? No, I think I've got them all. Because it was just the one that we worked on, and I think so. And it was obviously only one copy because we were handwriting it. So I kept the notebook. It's stashed away in a closet. Kept safe again as a time capsule of my possibly misspent youth.
So does that friend? Are you still in touch with them, and do they know you're writing now?
They know I'm writing now. I don't really talk with them much anymore. We just grew out of touch after a while, as things go. But a mutual friend of ours, who I met through that same friend, he and I still very much communicate, and he's one of my best friend at this point, and a trusted early reader of my stuff. So he always gets an early look at things.
Nice. So full circle almost.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. So that sounds like that's how you got into the fantasy stuff with the Rankin Bass and the Hobbit. What about the sci-fi? Where did that come from?
Oh, I mean, I feel like, for me, it's always been, they feel like sort of just two sides of the same coin. I realize that's, for a lot of people, they're fantasy fans or they're science fiction fans, but they're not both. But for me, it's always been, anything that's this cool sort of, this stuff I can't see in, walking out the door and looking at normal life has always been a draw for me. So, I mean, Star Wars into Star Trek, technology, I mean, as a little kid, you're like, it's like laser guns and, rocket ships and warp drives and all that stuff is cool. And then I enjoy writing sci-fi now because I feel like these days, for me at least, most of my interesting ideas come on the sci-fi side of things. And I just, I don't know. It's a good question. Not sure I have a great answer to it. Like I said, for me, it's always been both. I've always had a deep love of both fantasy, sci-fi, and horror. Just to roll in all the speculative fiction into one there. My dark sense of humor and somewhat bleak outlook on things works well with horror stories as well.
Now, with the love of horror, do you actually write horror stories, or is it just something you enjoy reading?
I have not written I have what I guess I'd call I've not written a pure horror story. I've written fantasy horror short story, and there's definitely elements of horror in my Mutagen Deception sci-fi series. And I would say the further the series goes, the more the horror part of sci-fi horror comes to the forefront. I think for whatever reason, the series has gotten a little bit more tinged with horror as it goes. Some of that is body horror stuff, which has been a part of that series from the beginning, but more and more it's getting into kind of an existential horror, and even a cosmic horror flavor as we get late in the series. And I'm working on the last book in that series now. So all that kind of stuff, the sort of the really deep questions of existence, I think, are ripe for horror storytelling.
Now, horror has very subgenres of what makes it horror, because horror can go in any setting. Like, it doesn't even have to be speculative fiction. You can set horror in the modern world. I've seen the joke about the shortest horror story. It's I'm from the IRS and we're here for an audit.
Yeah.
That's the Internal Revenue Service for you non-American listeners. So, like, I don't think horror necessarily has to be speculative fiction. So when you say horror, what are you talking about? Are you talking about like the body horror, just the psychological thriller? Because technically Birds, the Alfred Hitchcock show, was horror, but I don't know that people would necessarily call that speculative fiction.
No, you're absolutely right, and I'm misspeaking when I roll horror automatically into speculative fiction.
No, people do, but I think that you can have horror in other settings as well. And
oh yeah, I mean, you look at like with Silence of the Lambs. I mean, that is resolutely not speculative fiction, but it is also resolutely a horror movie, or I would call it a horror movie. I guess you call it a thriller also, but certainly horror itself doesn't have to be speculative in nature. I think the type of horror I write tends to be, just because that's the sort of story ideas that interest me. I like going beyond kind of what I would call mundane life, and that sounds pejorative of people who write more realistic styles. I don't mean it to be, but whereas I know a lot of people who find that stories grounded in real life are ones that resonate best. For me, it's always been exploring my thoughts on life and the world through the lens of speculative fiction, whether it's through fantasy or science fiction or horror, has always been the way I sort of process storytelling.
Is there anything about horror that speaks to you?
Like I said, we talked a little bit earlier about my enjoyment of Star Trek, despite seeing the kind of the falseness of some of its premises. I think, especially earlier on Star Trek, I think you look at the world, and if you have a knack for seeing the sort of the uglier side of things, or the uglier side of how people behave sometimes, that is a very fertile ground to explore in a horror context. And if you can take the sort of everyday horror of the world and amplify it through fantasy or through science fiction, if we're no longer afraid of a virus that comes from nature, but a genetically engineered virus, or worse, something that couldn't even exist according to the laws of biology as we know them, but you amplify it into something that works horrifically fast, like a zombie plague where the zombie bites you and 30 seconds later you're a zombie. I mean, no, there's no biology I'm aware of where that could happen, but by introducing it by stretching out your story into the speculative realm, you're allowing the reader to kind of play in that area, explore their fears, or maybe learn some all new fears, where they're not in any actual danger. And that's what makes horror fun, is we can put it down at the end, and even if it scared us, the book isn't, the story, the book, the movie, the TV show isn't going to hurt us.
Yeah, I think some of the allure is that it's just natural for humans to want to be scared. I mean, if you think about it, the person that heard the wind in the woods and said, "Oh, that might be a saber-toothed tiger, let's run," that person is alive. The person that said it's nothing when the saber-toothed tiger came is not alive and did not thus pass on his genes. So, like, we are descendants of fearful people in some respect, because it's a survival mechanism. So I think
exactly
that's a large part of the allure of it, like that life has become so safe. So horror stories give you a little bit of that thrill, especially if you've ever been like camping where you sit around the campfire and, try to one up each other.
Oh yeah. I remember doing a camping trip with my friends as kids, and it was like an overnight thing with our dads, and we're walking around the lake, and we see what obviously was dog footprints, but we absolutely convinced ourselves there was a wolf walking around stalking us, and we scared ourselves silly in a fun way with that story the whole weekend we were there. So I think you're right. we evolved in such a way that we fear things because fear keeps you alive. And so when you're presented with a world where there's less things to fear, you naturally go looking for things to scare you. And there's healthy ways to do that, and there's unhealthy ways to do that. Unhealthy ways lead to anxiety problems. Healthy ways involve reading horror fiction.
Yeah. So, is that when you decided, like, it sounds like you decided to write from an early age, at least, with your friend, but what made you decide to transition from, like, my mom and I are reading these cool stories to I'm going to try telling my own? Sounds like you did it younger than most, but what was that evolution like for you?
I remember I would, we had a basketball hoop um, at the back of our driveway when I was growing up, and I would go out and shoot baskets, and really as just a way to sort of enter a Zen state. Is not how I would have described it then, but that's what I was essentially doing. And while I was doing that, my mind would be wandering, and I would be inventing continuations of stories that I liked, be it TV shows or books or video games that were done, but I wanted the story to go on. And so just in my head, I would be telling myself continuations of those stories. And like I said, with my friend, around that time, we started trying to write our own. And then in senior year of high school, I had a really great AP English teacher. And she was the one who convinced me I was good at writing. She was very complimentary of my writing that whole year. Said I was possibly the best writer in the class at one point. And that really stuck with me. And I was the kind of kid who needed that kind of affirmation. And I always really appreciate that she did that. In fact, she's in one of my dedications in one of my books because of that. And but she's the one who convinced. So I already knew I liked writing at that point, but she was the one who convinced me I could be good at writing.
It helps to have someone with that cheering you on, I think, a little bit.
Absolutely.
So, all right. Well, we want to talk about the books that brought us here because I don't want to dance around the topic anymore. So we're going to pause for a moment while we shamelessly shill from the man. And then when we come back, we're going to talk about the books that brought us here. So if you wait for it, wait for it. Boom!
What will you do when the world goes belly up? Will you paint stripes on your cheeks, grab your flaming guitar, and enjoy the glorious post-apocalypse party? Or will you gnash your teeth and wail at the loss of civilization? Either way, we've a story for you. This post-apocalyptic collection has 15 great stories, each with its own spin on our future. Dive right into From the Ashes, a Bayonet Books anthology, before the future becomes now.
All right. Thank you for sticking with us through that commercial interlude. And with that out of the way, I'm going to throw the covers up. But while I do that, Gregory, where did the idea for the Mutagen Deception series come from?
It's difficult to answer that question because if I do, it will spoil a lot of the book. But basically, the way I write most of my books is kind of ideas aggregate in my head over usually a long period of time, usually a couple of years, honestly, before I'll have enough of them accumulate that is interesting in an interesting enough way that I say I think I can make a book or a series about this. In this case, I wanted a story exploring a young person who got thrust into a leadership position maybe before she was ready, or a leadership position higher than she'd intended before she was ready. And this series, this first book stars Yaz Delgassi, who is a newly elected magistrate in the last human city on Earth, which is called Cold Garden, and she is thrust into a web of conspiracy when she discovers that her boyfriend dead on the night of her election with a message that implies that it was not that it was a nefarious death, and the constant threat to this city, the reason why it's the last human city, is that the rest of the world is overrun by these alien monsters called revenants, and they're constantly trying to find a way past the city's defenses to get inside and finish off the last of humanity. So Yaz is forced to balance her need for understanding what happened to her boyfriend, her need for revenge, with the protection of the people she's suddenly entrusted with. And so I really wanted to explore this idea of a leader who was sort of forced into this position before she was ready. And I also really wanted to explore a kind of an alien threat that could mimic humans. That's what the Revenants are capable of doing, and shapeshift their forms to adapt to what the circumstance called for. And I like the idea of a city under siege. So those three ideas kind of gelled together into one story. And I always like to do that. I like to take multiple ideas that I have completely separate from one another and sort of push them together into a single story and say, okay, how do I force these ideas into a story that is coherent and does something interesting?
So right now there are 4 books out in the series. Is that the end of it, or is you going to have this ongoing?
There is one more book. I'm working on the final book now, book 5, which I would tell you the title, but it's tentative, and I don't have permission from Cursed Dragon Ship, my publisher, for that yet. But there is a tentative title. The book is in progress. I'm a good ways through the first draft, so we got one more to wrap it up. This series was fun because I wrote the first book without really a further series in mind. And when I signed with Cursed Dragon Ship, Kelly Lynn Colby, my amazing editor, said, "Now we want at least 3 books. Can you do that?" And I said, "Yep." Just because that's what I figured I should say. And then I had to figure out, okay, how do I spin this out into more stories, into a longer story than the first book, and it required rewriting some of the ending of the original draft, which I'd kind of written as somewhat of a standalone. But what's turned out is a lot of fun to read, and I hope to read, and it's certainly been fun to write. And I'm still kind of amazed when I look back at this dark little story that I came up with years ago, and that I've been allowed to play in this world for 5 whole books of it. Has been I still can't quite believe it. But this is a twisty turny, you can't try. Whenever I sign the book, I say, don't believe anybody in this book, and then I sign my name, because it's one of those stories where my favorite cliched attention grabber to describe a book is nothing is as it seems, and this is definitely a series where nothing is as it seems. I love stories like that.
So on each cover, you have a different model as part of the book art. So is this following a different person for every novel, or is it the same cast of characters?
It's an ensemble cast, and you don't meet every character in the first book, but by the end of the second book, all the major characters will have been introduced. So the Yaz is the character on the first book, and she's kind of the central character. Generally, we've tried to sort of put the central character of each book as the cover. The final book will feature the one major character who hasn't been featured to date, and I won't name names because I don't want to get into spoiler territory. But so yeah, each book is an ensemble cast, but generally there's one character that's getting more quote unquote screen time than the others in any given book.
So since Jana's not here, I do have to ask you the mom question without her. So for those that are listening that have young kids that like to read, because we've got some precocious readers in the audience, what would you say the age range is for this series? Are we talking, like, if you're using the movie theater ratings, because that's easy, is this PG, PG-13, rated R, something higher?
There's a fair amount of graphic violence. Like I said, there's the body horror is a big part of this. So if you are concerned about that as a parent, then I would consider this an R rating. Now, it's also true that, at least in my opinion, in book form, violence doesn't come across as quite as visceral as it does in visual media like television or movies. So if you're a little less concerned about that, I think a PG-13 rating. It doesn't have. There's some swear words. There's no explicit sex. There is some implied fade to black type stuff. But I would say so. It depends on the parent what they think is ready. But if you have a real concern about violence, there's plenty of violence in this, and so you might call this an R-rated series from that standpoint.
Okay. So what can you tell us about? You talked about the main character, the female that was kind of thrust in the power before she was ready. What can you tell us about the other characters? And this is an ensemble cast, so does this mean it's third person? Are these first person stories?
It's third person. So you have Yaz, you have her best friend Stephanie, who is a highly ranking scientist in the city, is in charge of one of what's called the Great Projects, which are these very highly funded research projects. There's a lot of mysteries with this city, a lot of poorly kept records of how humanity got into this situation, and there's a genetic plague afflicting the populace where if you take any sort of injury, so yeah, the second book is Stephanie, that's Stephanie on the cover there. If you take any sort of injury in this city, it's possible that your body will start what's called hypermutating and basically just start taking on various horrific forms. And it's also possible that that can spread from person to person. So a single person who starts hypermutating can actually cause an outbreak. So the city has various very strict laws. Like there's no, like when you go to a restaurant, all the cups are plastic. There's no glass allowed because broken glass can obviously lead to someone getting cut. And if someone gets cut, you could have a mass death incident. So Stephanie is one of the people in charge of researching what caused this plague and how to get out of it. Then there's an orphan who lives on the streets called Mari. She's about 12 years old, and she heads up a group of orphans. They basically pick through garbage for discarded technology to sell to get enough food to eat. And their favorite hunting grounds for this technology are about to be closed off in the effort to make the city more secure. And so she's got to find a way to keep her mice, as she calls them. That's what she calls the kids she looks out for, Mari's mice. She has to find a way to keep them fed. And then you have Carl as the fourth main POV character in the first book. And he is a Lancer, which is a member of the city's protective force. They're the ones that fight the Revenants when they manage to get a foothold, and otherwise just prevent them from getting in. So he's a kind of grizzled old veteran of this Lancer Corps, and he's one of my favorites to write just because he's very thoughtful. Think of him as kind of a philosopher soldier. Because he has a very sort of level-headed take on everything, and doesn't get too bent out of shape about things. But he's a fun contrast to some of the other characters in the story.
Okay. What kind of tech are we talking about?
You would say somewhere into like, if I had to, I'm careful not to peg specific years just because that's a great way to make your sci-fi book obsolete. But I would say technology that would feel at home in kind of middle to latter half of this century, if you were to map it to our version of Earth. So near future technology, not super advanced, as far not super advanced technology, but something that feels a little bit more closer to what we know, grounded technology.
Okay. Now, do you cover, does this just jump in the middle of the action with the aliens already pretty much here? Or do we see how the aliens came, how Earth fell to the point where there's only one human city left?
No, you jump in and it's established right away that this is, long after the arrival of the aliens, long after the fall of the rest of Earth. This is a city that's been existing this way for some time. How much time, nobody's quite sure. Again, because their records of the past are very spotty. So there's inherently a mystery associated with this, and a part of the story is absolutely the reader finding out more about how all this went down what exactly happened. There's usually in my books a deeper world building type mystery of how we got to where we are. It's almost never what the characters think it is, or if it is, it's in some way they weren't expecting. That's just the kind of stuff I write, kind of stuff I like to write. I like big overarching mysteries that will slowly unfold over the span of the series. But you do get quite a bit of information just in the first book, and then starting with the second book, we unveil a whole bunch of new mysteries for you. So it's I don't want anybody to think that you have to read the whole series before you get any answers. You're getting answers spooled out as the series goes on, and then new mysteries are introduced, and gradually over the course of the series we delve deeper and deeper into kind of the root causes behind everything, and eventually in the final book we'll get lots of juicy answers to close things out.
So is this when you're done with this series, is this something that you foresee coming back to other stories in the universe, or when this fifth book ends you're done?
So funny you should ask that, because my other current series, Belle Begrudgingly Solves It, is set in this universe. It is a totally different tone of series because it's a sci-fi murder mystery comedic series, but it's comedic mostly because Belle, the main character, is funny. At least I think she is. Not because the universe is still sort of the same dark place that this series depicts, so it doesn't jar tonally. But there is a brief crossover between the two series. In books 2 and 3, there's a brief point where the two series cross over each other. I did that on purpose as a fun little Easter egg for people who read both series. But it's important to note that you don't have to read both series to understand what's going on. All the information you need for a given series is present in each series. If you read both, you'll catch some extra Easter eggs. You'll point and say, "Oh, I've seen that character in the other book. That's fun." But it's not requirement, or not a required reading to understand. I don't want to be one of those authors that, if you don't read all 17 series, you won't know what's going on. I want each one to stand on its own,
which is commendable. Now, right now, these are out in audiobook, or excuse me, in ebook and print. Are they going to have audiobooks?
So, but the first two are in audio. At some point, I'm hoping we can revisit the rest in audio. I know Cursed Dragon Ship, they've looked at it and have said, right now we're not making enough back to justify spending the money on audio, because they commendably, I think, have been insisting on real, human readers, not doing AI, and that's expensive. And working with a narrator for the first time was a very eye-opening experience for me. I can tell you that there was a lot of challenging to pronounce names in the first book, and savvy readers will notice that starting in the second book, when I introduce new characters, the names become a lot easier to pronounce because certain people, me, got tired of having to correct the pronunciation of my poor narrator, and it's not her fault. It was my fault for writing impossible to pronounce names, because when you're writing for a reader, you don't think about pronunciation issues until you encounter having to do an audiobook, and you're like, oh, these names are actually really hard to say. So you adjust your approach some once you've done it once. But yes, they are available in print and ebook. On ebook is their Amazon Kindle Unlimited. They're Kindle exclusives right now. I think at some point, once the series is done, Cursed Dragon Ship is going to move them into more of a wide distribution. But for the time while the series is coming out, they've been sticking with Kindle Unlimited. But they are available in print as well.
Okay. Now, with this series, we've talked that they're aliens, sort of shape-shifting creatures are there. What else can you tell us about these aliens without spoilers?
They are insectile in nature. Do you video game at all?
A little bit.
Did you ever play XCOM?
No,
Way
I'm
back in
aware
the
of
day?
it though.
So there's an alien species in there called the chrysalids, and they're these sort of insectile looking monster things, and they definitely were on my mind as I was coming up with the revenants. The revenants are definitely a distinct thing, but insectile, human-sized insectile horrors is definitely a fascination of mine, I guess, for in terms of monsters. When I think of monsters, it tends to go in those directions. So I would say that's the best description I can use for them. They will, if they catch people, they eat them. They are. It's unclear how intelligent they are. They're certainly cunning because they can get through these complicated defenses into the city. But it's not clear whether they're truly intelligent, and if they are truly intelligent, or if they aren't intelligent, how is it that they sort of overran the world in the first place? So all these things are very interesting questions that the reader gets to parse through.
And how they got there if they're not intelligent.
Correct. Yeah.
Now, obviously, the reader has to figure it out. Was that something you went into this book knowing those answers, or did you figure it out as you went?
I knew pretty early on the big answers. Generally, I have trouble. I am a I'm not a thorough outliner, but I'm not the sort of person who also just writes into the dark or pantses, as they say sometimes, where I start without an ending in mind. I generally can't even start unless I know the beginning and I know the ending, and a few waypoints in the middle. And I will improvise my way between the waypoints, and then have to go back and kind of clean up stuff that kind of ran off into tangents and didn't lead anywhere. But no, I know the ending, the big answers before I get started.
Okay. So this city, do you actually ever say where the last human city is geographically in Earth, or do you leave that kind of up in the air?
I leave that up in the air. Oh, no, actually, that's not true. I don't leave that up in the air. It's supposed to be so I was looking when I was trying to decide what the city would be. I was looking for a city whose name I could take and sort of dissect it into a more evocative sounding name. And I happened upon the city of Calgary in Canada. And it's disputed a little bit, but I was looking up Calgary, the origin of the name Calgary. And it loosely, I think, I feel like it was, I can't remember what the language was, and I don't want to say it wrong, so I'm not going to guess, but it loosely translated to Cold Garden, which I thought was a very evocative name for a city. So Cold Garden became the name of the city, and it's explicitly stated in the book that it used to be called Calgary, but now it's called Cold Garden.
Okay.
And I've never been to Calgary, so nobody sue me for any geographic. I don't want to give the impression that I looked up the city plan of Calgary and mapped it to this book. I didn't. So if anybody reads it expecting an accurate depiction of the city of Calgary, you won't find it.
So Calgary is named after Calgary Castle on the island of Mull in Scotland. I'm looking this up now. That's what the inspiration for the city of Calgary in Canada was for.
Yeah. I think I wanted to say Scottish, but I didn't want to speak out of turn either. So, and I'm not sure that
this was from the Treaty of Seven of Southern Albertan First Nation peoples. They referred to Calgary as the elbow because it was the elbow of rivers, or elbow river. In the Blackfoot language, I'm not even pronounce that word, but it's elbow of many houses. So it looks like elbow is the meaning. I'm not finding anything what you're talking about, but it's still a cool origin anyway.
Yeah, it was like I said, I think it was Yeah. And I want to. I'll be clear. Like when I looked this up, I think when I wrote the first draft of this story, it was maybe 2012. It was a while ago. Um, I was doing, 2012 era internet searches for this, where we don't have quite the powerhouse tools. We didn't have quite the powerhouse tools we have now for such things. I happened upon some website that referenced the word Calgary as potentially being derived from cold garden, I think in Gaelic, and I thought that was cool sounding. I have no idea if that's accurate in any way, but I went with it. So.
Well, there is a Cold Garden microbrewery and taproom in Calgary, Alberta, Canada.
Oh, so maybe I'm not totally insane, or at least not along this axis.
Okay, it's interesting. I find etymology of words fascinating.
Yeah,
So
I do as well.
with that said, with the city, are we talking it's a megatropolis kind of deal? Is it a huge city, or are we talking like humanity's on the brink of genetic collapse kind of thing? Like, where are we?
It's large enough to not be worried about that. Their main genetic problem is this mysterious disease that plagues them. But so it's a big city, but it's walled in because they got to keep the revenants out. They have to grow. They have to alternate between printing their food in printers and growing it in big sort of lattices that extend above the city and can catch the sunlight. So it's very much in fact, the original title of the working title of the book, before I signed with Cursed Dragon Ship, was Prison City. So that can give you an idea of kind of the sense that they're trapped in the city. It's their haven, but it's also their prison. Because if they leave, they'll be killed. So I was really going for kind of a city besieged feeling, even though it's a large space. There's a constant danger, but both from outside the city and from within the city. So I'm really going for that kind of It's the largest city that's ever felt claustrophobic. Is what I was going for.
Okay, so I solved the question with a handy Google. And the Calgary means in Gaelic, which I'm not going to pronounce, it means bay farm or pasture by the bay, harbor pasture meadow for Calgary. If you use the Gaelic to English translation, but some have suggested Calgary could be cult and then gart together as one word, which is Old Norse for cold, calt, and then gart, garden, enclosed plot, or yard. So if you believe the origin of the word was Old Norse, then it makes sense. But science, history, etc., has disproven that. But it was apparently a long-suffering internet rumor that started in the dawn of the internet.
Okay, well, it's entirely possible that I read both of those and just decided that Cold Garden sounded better, so I went with that.
Yeah, no, I dig it. I just was curious, and so it was one of those things where my mind won't let those threads go until I just dive and dive and dive. But
that's cool. Like I said, I'm glad to see now. The next time I get asked that question, I can answer it more authoritatively.
So, how much of the original, when you designed Cold Garden, how much of the original Calgary still exists, and how much of it is essentially a new city on the same plot of land? Because that does happen, like cities evolve over time, right? Like
that's true. Yeah. I did not. Basically, once I decided on Calgary, I looked it up enough to say, okay, it's landlocked, which is what I wanted. I wanted a landlocked city, and it had a river, and I wanted that too because they need a source of water to realistically be able to survive. So it's got a river. So, but essentially, aside from that, I just went with what worked for the story. I didn't map it to Calgary, the real Calgary, beyond the fact that it's a landlocked city with a river running through it. So and there's good reasons for that in story that I won't get into. for spoiler purposes. But you know, my philosophy on realism is I try to stick to it whenever possible. But ultimately, you have to go with what works for the story best. That's what's most important. And if you have to, I do try to know when I'm sacrificing realism for the sake of story, and at least be aware that I'm doing it. But I am fully willing to do it.
So you mentioned that this is passed on. This mutagen virus is passed on. Does it affect the food source, or is it infecting the animals and the wildlife and stuff too?
It seems to just affect the city dwellers. So no, as far as anybody can tell, it's a purely human condition.
Okay. In your head, is there an origin story for the Revenant too? Is that something that you've already solved?
Oh yeah. No, I know the answer to that.
Is that something you're going to address in a later series?
That's addressed in this series. You'll know the origins of the Revenants by the time you finish the series. I won't tell you when you find that out.
No. So what I'm asking is, like, if you say alien, that implies they come from somewhere other than Earth. Yes. So
right.
Do we ever see a series where you take the story to that planet, that place?
All I can say is that all your questions about the Revenants will be answered by the end of this series. And yes, you will see the world where they came from. That I can answer.
So you don't need another series to keep it going. You've already answered it on this one.
Right now the continuation of this world is my other series that I mentioned, Bell Begrudgingly Solves It, and that will continue stories set in this universe. But it's a separate thing. The story of Mutagen Deception will be completed with this 5-book series, and if I don't foresee needing to go back to it, but I'll never say never. Also, I mean, if a good idea occurs to me down the road, I won't say that I wouldn't revisit it. But I fully into the story of these 5 books to be complete within these 5 books and not need to be addressed elsewhere.
Okay. So is there anything, like you mentioned the 4 main characters in your ensemble cast, or 5, are there any secondary characters that really speak to you?
Secondary character. Well, so the character introduced in the second book started out as a secondary character, and I did not intend for her to become a major character, but she kind of took over, and rapidly was like threatening to take over the whole book. And I realized, I see. I need to have something different in mind for you. So this is a case of one of those cases you hear about from writers sometimes, where the character just kind of takes on a life of their own and threatens to take over the story. And so I rewrote her into a much larger role, much more important role, where she had been sort of a much more secondary role at first, and that's always a lot of fun when that happens. I always enjoy that a lot, and she wound up being probably the most fun character, one of the most fun characters to write in the series. I had have a lot of fun with her.
Okay. Would you live in this world if you could?
God, no. No. It's a pretty horrifying place.
Okay. Now, given like the kind of torture you put these characters through, if you met them in the back of a dark alley late at night, are you thinking you're in trouble, or are you going to be able to talk your way out of this one?
Oh, I think a lot of people. I don't do nice things to them at all. So yeah, I think I would definitely not want to meet them in person unless I had some sort of godlike ability to defend myself. I don't think that would go me.
Okay. Is there anything about this series that we didn't ask that you want to tell us before we wrap it?
No, I think we've covered everything. I think blasting it. I hope people have a blast reading it. It's like I said, if you like twisty, turny stories that never go the way you think they're going to go, it's a great one to check out. And I hear from a lot of people that they, will binge read the last half of the book in a single night, and that's what I love to hear. My favorite, if you don't mind. A little bit of profanity. My favorite review ever of the first book is from a friend of mine who texted me shit, Greg.
Okay. All right. Well, this is the part, dear listener, where I ask you to please be kind and speak your mind on the reviewing platforms. Your reviews help the right readers find the right book, so do your part. It really does make a difference. And with that being said, Greg, where might they find you on the wild, wild interwebs? I know your internet's starting to fade in and out and get a little reverby. So if you could just say the place you're most active, and then we'll link to everything else in the show notes.
The place to me is the Kraken ship Gord. That's where I'm most active. If you want to message me directly, just do it through my website, www.gregorydlittle.com. I'm honestly not that active on social media these days. I have accounts, all of them, but you're not likely to get me quickly there. So shooting me an email or popping into the Cursed Dragon Ship Discord is the fastest way to reach me.
All right. And you can find us, dear listener, on our Linktree, linktr.ee, Linktree/Blasters and Blades podcast, where we link to all the things, the BitChute, the Rumble, the YouTube, the TikTok, the Twitter. We've got our Spotify, our Discord, our Substack, our Blasters and Blades Facebook group and Facebook page. You can email us at blastersandbladespodcast@gmail.com. Again, blastersandbladespodcast@gmail.com for professional purposes only, people. Save shenanigans from Stabby Stab over there on the Instagram, the Twitter, and the email. You can support the show by going to buymeacoffee.com/AuthorJRHanley. Again, buymeacoffee.com/AuthorJRHanley. Be sure to put in the comment section that it's for the podcast, and I promise I will keep my co-host duly caffeinated. And with that, these episodes are not free to produce, and every penny helps. So do your part. It really does make a difference. And with that, I'd like to thank you for spending some of your precious time with us. For my absentee and crazy co-host, this was JR. I am JR Hanley, and this was the Blasters and Blades podcast. We'll be back next week at the same time, where we'll indulge our love of nerd culture, cheesy jokes, and all things that go boom. And with that, thanks for coming on, Greg.
Thank you. I had a great time, JR. I really appreciate it.
All right, with that, we're going to hit the end button. Wait for it. And